Welcome to episode 24 of the Two and Tie podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Two and Tie podcast. Today we're actually going to cover off something that I've been trying to do for a really long time, and that is build my own basement. And so my wife is going to be joining as a co-host today.
Hi everybody.
And we're going to go over some of the good things about building your own basement, some of the bad things about building your own basement, and maybe give you some tips along the way, or at least we're going to try to. But that's a goal. So let's get into today's podcast. So today we want to cover off sort of talking about building your own basement. So let me take a step back and sort of explain why I decided to build my own basement and not get that outsourced. So my parents actually got their basement built probably about 4, maybe 5 years ago or so. And they had an interesting experience. The reason why I say that was my parents and myself at the time knew very little about construction. And the challenge with that is when you have a contractor who understands that their customer knows very little about construction, they like to sometimes take advantage of those people. Now, I'm not saying this is how all contractors are. If you listen to all of my podcasts in the past or my past episodes, what I say is this is all based on my own personal experience. Maybe I just haven't had, and my parents haven't had the best luck with contractors, but that kind of inspired me to build my own because I did bring in some people to give me some quotes on building the basement, and they were quoting over $100,000 easy. Like that was one of the lowest bids. And my basement is probably 1,000 square feet at the very most. So to build 1,000 square feet at $100,000, just I couldn't justify it. And knowing a little bit about renovation itself, I felt that this is something that I can take on. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how I started and where I am today. And joining me on that journey is my wife Poonam, who's been helping me actually build the basement, has been very instrumental in getting us where we are today.
Well, that's very nice of you to say.
Yeah. So let's talk about the journey. So we started building the basement about a year ago or so, maybe a little bit longer than a year. So maybe October 2015. Right now it's December 2016. So it's been about a year and maybe a month or 2 months on top. So here's where we are with the basement today. So I actually thought that I can have this entire basement built by the summer of 2016. So I was wrong, obviously. And the funny thing is, our neighbor actually told us, and he said, wait a minute. So he was actually talking to my wife, and he said, so your husband's doing this basement on his own? And she said, well, yeah. And he said, it's going to be another 3 years. So why don't you actually just tell us about that conversation you had with our neighbor across the street?
Well, first of all, he's an electrician. So he has a little bit of an understanding of what is entailed with building a basement. And so, yeah, we were just having a candid conversation one day. I was just outside and he had said that he had noticed that we were bringing in a lot of lumber and a lot of insulation. And he was just sort of curious to know what we were doing. And I said, well, our basement's unfinished. So, my husband's taken on the project of building it. And he said, oh, that's going to take at least 2 to 3 years. And I actually laughed when he said that because I thought he was being sarcastic. But now that we're a year and 2 months in and probably only about halfway through, I can actually see it being another year or so.
So that's where Poonam and I actually have a disagreement in terms of the percent of completion. So when I actually said that I'm going to get this basement working, it was to get 75% of it done because the other 25% is sort of like, it's like, I don't want to say it's wasted space, but it's space that's going to be hard to build on, right? So of that 75%, I'm going to say today we're 90% there. No, hang on. Let me quantify that. And qualify that. So All the framing has been complete. Okay. The electrical has been put in. I got everything inspected. So this is one of the tips I'm going to give you guys, and that is make sure you take out the permits. I know people are hesitant about taking out permits because electricians are going to, or, the city inspector is going to come and say, this is wrong, and so forth. But he's only saying it because that's minimum code. And keep in mind, if something does happen down the road, there is a very high likelihood that your insurance company is not going to cover anything that was not inspected. So tip number 1, get the inspections. So the lumber was put in, all the electrical was put in. So I got the rough-in inspection. That was completed. All the insulation went in. So the insulation that we actually use Roxol across the entire basement for a few reasons. One of them being that I wanted it to be fire rated, and that's one of the minimum codes in Ontario that you got to follow by. But that's more for the ceiling. But I also wanted to Roxol insulate the walls as well because I wanted to be soundproof. So I used soundproof insulation. On top of that, I actually exceeded the minimum code in Ontario, where in the basement you need an R20 value. I used an R10 foam board. And then on top of that, I use an R4 insulation from Roxol, which again is fire rated. So I'm happy because I've exceeded minimum code on the insulation, and I've got fire rated insulation. On top of that, drywalling is complete. So I've drywalled the ceiling with X-Fire rated drywall because you need at least that is the minimum code in Ontario, and that's 5/8 of an inch. I've also drywalled all the walls, which is 1/2 inch. I've painted the subfloors.
Correction, I've painted.
Paint has been completed. Subfloor has been put in. The only outstanding... Oh, sorry, on top of that, for the guys out there who really, really want a kick-ass home theater, I've put in, so far, about 12 speakers already, and there's a couple of more to go still on the other end. So... home theater has been set up. Home automation has been set up. And now all I got to do is put in my big subwoofer that I just bought and put in the floor and put in the trim. And the basement, on the 75% that I committed to, is complete.
So there's absolutely no doubt that we've done a lot. And of course, just reading out or listing out the things that Sats has talked about, keep in mind that both Sats and I work full-time. So that's the other piece. We're not doing this on a full-time basis. We're doing this when we come home from a hard day's work. We have a set of twins that are toddlers. And so we come home from work and we've got, another shift to do as far as parenting goes. And then once they go to bed, if we're not pooped out of our minds, we go into the basement and spend a few hours. So it takes a toll on us. And oftentimes from Monday to Friday, it doesn't always get done. So we're lucky if we get in the basement 2 to 3 times a week.
So that brings me to the next tip, and that is cost versus time. As I said earlier, when contractors came in, they quoted me well over $100,000 for what I would call basic building. So if they actually put in the kind of crown molding that I'm planning to put in, or the kind of trim that I'm planning to put in, that would all be incremental on top. To date, we've maybe spent 25% of that budget, tops. And that's including the home theater, that's including the subwoofer, and all the other expensive gadgets that I've got down there. Now, the trade-off with that is if you hire somebody, and you hire somebody good who's not going to quote-unquote screw you over, you can probably get the basement done within 4 to 6 weeks. Now, if you're not in a hurry, like we're not in a hurry at all, it's been over a year, but as Poonam explained, the reason is we have full-time jobs. We also want to come home and spend time with our kids. And depending on what time they go to bed, because they are so young right now, they're not even 2 yet, it really depends on how much time we get in the basement. And then on weekends, you want to try to balance work versus family time as well. So in the end, it really comes down to timing. If you actually need your basement completed quickly, you may want to look at outsourcing it. Or if you're not confident in doing it yourself, you may want to look at outsourcing it. But if not, I'm of the opinion that anybody can actually learn all the stuff that needs to go in the basement. So when the inspector came in and he saw the framing, he asked me, he said, "Who did the framing?" And I said, "I did it." And he says, "What's your experience with framing?" And I said, "Very little." And he was actually very impressed because he said some of the trades actually cut corners. And so they'll miss for certain things. When the electrician came in, he said, "Well, who did your electricity?" I said, "Well, I did." And he said he's surprised because the way that the electricity is run, some electricians would cut corners. They would run things through the bulkheads because that's what electricians love to do. But I did it in a way because I thought of the future, and I said if I needed to run wire in the future, I'm going to run it a certain way and through a certain methodology so that if I need to run it in the future, it's very easy for me to do. So he was actually very impressed with that as well. So the rough inspection, check, completed, we're good to go. When the plumbing came, the inspector said, "Well, who did your plumbing?" And I said, "Well, I did." And he said he's surprised because it was done in a way where the sloping was actually right on. And he said if sometimes the trades will cut corners, well, they'll actually, they won't get the sloping right on. They'll move it a little bit higher, a little bit lower. But at the end of the day, it's your home, so you're going to want to do it properly. So even if you got to spend 3 or 4 times longer than an actual trade, it's worth it because you're doing it proper, you're doing it for your family, and you're going to do it right the first time. And that is my whole purpose as to why I prefer to do the work on my own. And like I said, based on experience in the past, I haven't exactly had the best luck with contractors, we'll put it that way. And like I said, I'm not blaming all contractors out there. I'm putting it specifically on the experience that I've had. Now, one of the driving forces for me to get this basement done is my wife, because she'll always come down to me and say, "Why don't we just hire somebody to get everything done?" And I said, "Well, do you have the budget to hire somebody? And then do you have the time to oversee these trades to make sure they're doing it properly?"
And of course, the answer is no to both of those.
So my question to her a year later now is to say, is it really worth spending $100,000, over, call it 4 to 6, even 8 weeks, whereas you can save 75% of that? I mean, yeah, it's been a year and a half, but I'm going to say that I'll probably be done within the next month or 2. So even if you look at it hasn't been a year and a half, it's been a year and 2 months, and I'll be done probably within the next month or 2. So if you factor in that time, I don't know why she's laughing right now, but if you factor in that time, even give me another 2 months to a year and a half, I basically done it for a quarter of the price and quality that I'm satisfied with and the inspector's satisfied with. I think it's a win-win situation.
And it is. So I'm coming across as a really bad person. I think I need to clarify and sort of, get my name out of the dirt here. So in all honesty, I appreciate all the hard work because even though I'm downstairs helping Sats, let's just be real. I'm there to sort of pass the tools, give him some opinions as far as, some decor and things go as aesthetic wise. But as far as knowing the materials and what needs to be put in place and knowing the codes, that's all him. Now, one thing that I can honestly say that I appreciate about it is that if something ever does go awry, so if something stops working, because he's the one who put it together, he knows exactly what to do. He knows possibly what could have gone wrong, and he knows how to try to fix it because he knows how it was all put together. So that's definitely another pro. If you have somebody outsourced to do your basement, oftentimes you don't have any idea of where the wires are going or where the plumbing is going or what could be causing the problem. And so that can cause some more complications. And then that means that you'd have to outsource again to get somebody to come in and investigate it and really interrogate what happened and then fix it. So there's definitely a cost savings from that perspective too, just based on the fact that the investigations and all of that can be done in-house if you already have a good bearing on what was done because you've built it yourself.
Exactly. So basically what I'm trying to say is if you build your own basement, there's a lot of perks to it. Now, building your own basement involves a lot of steps, and that's what I want to dedicate my future podcast to. So I'm going to start with framing your basement, then I'm going to start with the electrical, I'm going to start with the insulation, the type of drywall to use, the best drywall to use. the type of paint to use, because believe it or not, painting in the basement actually matters. The type of trim you pick out for your basement. If you're going to be installing new windows, or if you're going to be installing new doors, there's also a difference in terms of what you're going to put in. Because if you're, for example, you're going to put a window in your basement or a door in your basement, there's actually codes that you need to abide by. And those codes are going to determine, or going to be dependent on, whether or not you're going to have a bedroom down there, if somebody's going to be living down there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that need to go into a basement in terms of code, in terms of consideration, in terms of tools and material that I didn't even know about, and I learned along the way. So I want to help you guys by saving you guys the time and the agony of figuring out things after the fact, because it can get a little costly sometimes. So my next couple of podcasts, I'm actually going to run down by every single type of thing that you need to do in the basements. For example, my next podcast will be around framing. How do you frame, the different types of frame, the types of lumber you want to use, when to use things like mold resistant lumber, when to use things like, regular spruce lumber, and basically how to tie in the framing in your basement. Then after that, I want to dedicate a podcast towards electrical. So I want to help you guys through the journey if you're going to do it yourselves. I'm 90% there. I know that I've done a decent job because the inspectors have passed everything. And anytime somebody comes over, they're like, holy crap, I can't believe you did this on your own. So I'm going to do my best to help you guys along the way. If you do have questions, do shoot them over at sats, S-A-T-S, at toolandtie.com. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you got. So that's all I've got today. I'm going to be back next week. So thank you again, Poonam, for joining us today.
No problem.
And until next time, guys, stay happy, stay productive, and stay safe.